Psachim Paraches Mishnah Aleph. Isha bezman shehi bebeis bailo shochet haleo bailo v'shochet haleo avia toichel misha bailo. We learned previously in Parag Hey and in Parag Vav, one must be registered on a Korban Pesach before it's shechted in order to be mekayim the mitzvah of achilas Korban Pesach. The person cannot be registered on more than one Korban Pesach. Now, the following Mishnah discusses various cases in which two people each are registered and a third person is on their Korban Pesach. The Mishnah will teach which, if any, of the registrations are valid. The first case is where a woman's father and husband both register her on their karbonos, and she did not state in advance which one she wants to join. A person cannot be registered on a Korban Pesach without his explicit consent, unless we give good reason to assume that he agrees to the registration, as the Mishnah will explain. So, when a woman's in her husband's house, she's married, her husband registered her and shechted his Korban Pesach on her behalf, and her father also registered her and shechted his Korban Pesach for her as well. She eats from her husband's Korban, because we may assume that a married woman prefers to be registered on her husband's Korban over her father's. If, however, she went to spend the first Yom Tov after she got married in her father's house, it was common practice for a newly married couple to spend the first Yom Tov after they're married in the home of their wife's father. I think this minhag still exists today. The Mishnah refers to a case in which the first Yom Tov after the woman got married was Pesach, and therefore she was to spend Pesach with her family, with her father. So if, however, she went to spend the first Yom Tov after she got married in her father's house, and her father and her husband both registered and shechted the Korban Pesach on her behalf, she may eat in whichever place from whichever Korban she said she wanted to be registered on before it was shechted. Obviously, it has to be before it was shechted, as we spoke in those Mishnahs previously in Parag Hey and Parag Vav, that it's before the Achila. However, if she does not say anything at that time, she may not eat from either Korban, because in this case, it cannot be assumed which Korban she preferred. Since she's spending the first Yom Tov with her father, as most married couples do, it's possible that she prefers to eat from her father's Korban over her husband's. Therefore, the registration, the minoi of the Karbanis is good, since neither registration is good, since they both lack her consent. The next case of the Mishnah involves the guardians of a Yosem, an apotropis. These are people appointed by the father before he died, or by the Bezdin, to manage the monetary affairs or any other affairs of the assignment. So in the case of a Yosem, who has two guardians, and each one of the apotropis registered the Yosem on his Korban, and shechted it on his behalf, so the Yosem can eat it in whichever place, from whichever Korban he wants, even if he didn't say anything before the Korban Pesach was shechted. This is because the Torah authorizes the guardian, the apotropis, to register the Yosem under his care, even without their consent. The pasuk says they should take for themselves, each man, a lamb for his household, for the Korban Pesach. This implies that the head of the household, the father or the guardian who is appointed in place of the father, has the right to register the members of his household, even without their consent. The Mishnah refers here to a Yosem who is a katan, but a guardian, an apotropis, cannot register an adult orphan without his consent, and the same for a father registering his children, can only register a gadol with their consent, but a katan not as much. So either of the guardian's registrations can be valid for the Yosem, depending on which one the Yosem chooses. However, he cannot choose to be registered on both karbanos, since one person cannot be registered on two karbanos. Eved shel shnei shutvin lo yoichal mishel shneihem. The owner of an Eved Kanani has the right to decide which Korban Pesach the Eved will be registered on, even against a slave's will. An Eved Kanani is a non-Jewish slave who undergoes a partial conversion, a partial gerus, and is mechuyev in the same mitzvahs that a isha is mechuyev in. Such a slave is considered a member of the master's household, who the master can register without consent, as we mentioned before. The Mishnah discusses the case of a slave that's owned by two shutvim, who is registered by his owners on their karbanos. So in the case of an Eved Kanani who is owned by two shutvim, and each one of the shutvim registered the slave on his Korban Pesach, the slave may not eat from either one of them, because neither registration is valid. Since each owner has the rights to only half the Eved, each partner cannot register the half he does not own without the consent of the other partner. So the only way the slave can be registered on a Korban Pesach is if both owners agree to the slave being registered with one of the owners. A person who is half Eved Kanani and half free, For example, a slave who was owned by two people and one of them freed him, whose owner registered him on the Korban Pesach, he may not eat from his owner's korban because we assume that the owner intended to register only the half that's the eved and not the half that's already meshuchra. Meaning freed. Even if the slave expressed his consent, the registration is not good since the owner did not intend to register him. So thus the slave is not fully registered on the korban and therefore may not eat from it. This can go down into another one of the halachos of how to deal with chatzi ever, chatzi ben chayron. Mishnah Beis. Person told the servant, go out and shech the korban pesach for me, but he didn't specify if he wanted a goat or a sheep. A korban pesach may be either a kid, a young goat, or a lamb, which is a young sheep that's less than a year old. This Mishnah discusses in which one person authorized another person to buy an animal for the korban pesach and be meman him on the korban, but it was unclear what kind of animal he wanted. This raises the shaila as to which animal may be used for the korban, since the mimi requires his consent and it needs to be mefer, so to speak, on which animal he's consenting to. Shochet k'di yoichal, shochet la yoichal. If the servant if the eved shechted the goat, the odin may eat from it. Shochet la yoichal. If the servant shechted a lamb, the master may eat from it, because we assume that the master left it up to the servant to decide what type of animal to use. Even if the master chose a lamb in previous years, and the servant chose a kid or vice versa, since the odin did not specify this time, we assume that he agrees to let the servant choose for him, and we're not going to go with the fact, well, last year or in all previous years he always used a sheep, so this year he's also going to use a sheep. We don't say that. However, if the servant shechted both a sheep and a goat, the master eats from the one that was shechted first, because we assume that the odin does not care if the korban is a gedi or a tla. So if the first one shechted was good and the second one was no good, since the odin already was yaitze his chiyuv, the first one is good, the second one is no good, since the odin already fulfilled his chiyuv with the first one. The Gemara explains that the Mishnah refers to a case of a king and queen who sent their servant to bring a korban pesach on their behalf. Since fine foods are always available to them, they're not particular about if the korban is a kid or a lamb, and they therefore accept whichever korban was shechted first. However, in the case of a regular person whose eved shechted both animals, both korbanos are no good, because such a person may specifically want a specific animal. Since the odin relied on the eved to choose for him, but the servant didn't choose, rather he shechted one of each kind, it turns out that the master was not registered on either one. Shachach ma'omer rabbi, if the master did specify which animal he wanted, but the servant forgot what his master told him, Keted Yaseh, what should the servant do? Yishchat le'ugdi. He should buy and shecht both a lamb and a gedi, and say the following for their shecht, and make azat tonight. Im gedi omar li rabbi gedi shaloi tleshali. Im tele omar li rabbi ha tleshaloi ugdi shali. If my master told me to bring a kid, let the kid be a korban pesach for him, and the lamb be a korban pesach for me. And if my master told me to bring a lamb, let the lamb be a korban pesach for him, and the gedi be a korban pesach for me. The servant then goes back to the master and finds out which one he specified. The master eats from that animal, and the servant eats from the other one. However, if the Rebbe, the master, also forgot what he told the servant on both animals had already been shechted, both animals must go out to the Beis HaShreifa, to the place of burning, the place outside the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash, where disqualified karbonos are burnt, as we spoke about in Perek Zion. This is because we don't know which of the animals belongs to the master, and which is the korban that belongs to the servant. And a person may not eat from a korban on which he's not registered, and a korban pesach that cannot be eaten is burnt, as we spoke in Perek Zion Mishnah Tes. Upturim milas pesach sheni, but they're exempt from making the second pesach offering because they fulfilled the chiyuv of korban pesach with these korbanos, even though they didn't eat from them. A person who was unable to fulfill his chiyuv on Yud Daled Nisan brings another korban pesach a month later on the 14th of Iyar. This makeup offering, this makeup korban, is called pesach sheni. In this case, however, both the master and the eved fulfilled the chiyuv of korban pesach, since the owner specified which one he wanted and is therefore registered on that animal and the servant on the other. So although we don't know who was registered on which animal, each one definitely had a korban pesach on which he was registered, offered on his behalf. As long as a person's korban pesach was nikrav properly, he has fulfilled his chiyuv, even if he didn't eat from it. So he's going to be yotze his chiyuv over here like this as well. Even if he didn't eat from it, he's patur milas pesach sheni. Mishnah Gimel. Ha'omer lebanov, if one who is going to Yerushalayim to bring his Korban Pesach to his sons, who will be arriving in Yerushalayim after the Korban Pesach is already shechted, but in time to eat from the Korban, Hareini ha'armel abon, if someone says Hareini shechet es Pesach al misha yalam mekamisha in Yerushalayim, I'll shech the Korban Pesach for the first one of you who gets up to Yerushalayim. The halacha is as follows: as soon as the first son sticks his head and most of his body into the city, this is considered entering the city, by most of his body being entering through the walls of Yerushalayim. He acquires his chelik in the korban and acquires the portions for his brothers along with him. So when the father said he'll shecht for the son who comes first, he didn't mean to register only him, rather he meant that the son would be in charge of the chabura. The father wanted his sons to come to Yerushalayim quickly, bezrizus, because he wanted them to be zealous in their performance of the mitzvahs, as he states in the Gemara. He therefore appointed the son who arrives first as the leader, who picks a portion for himself first and gives out the other portions to his brothers. However, he indeed shechted it with all his children in mind. He didn't not have in mind any of his children. La'olam nimnin alav, any amount of people can register on the Korban Pesach, as long as there's a shear of a kazayas of meat in the animal for each and every one of them. This is the minimum amount of meat one must eat to be yotzei the chiyuv of eating the Korban Pesach. The Mishnah now discusses the latest time one can register on a Korban Pesach, or back out from a korban in order to register on a different one. People can register on the Korban Pesach and withdraw from it until it's shechted. We learned this from the pasuk. According to the number of people, shall you be counted tachoisu on the lamb. The word tachoisu can also be interpreted to mean you shall shecht. Thus, the Torah is teaching that the registration process must take place before the shechita. The halacha about backing out is learned from the earlier part of this pasuk, as explained in the Gemara. But Reb Shimon argues, and Reb Shimon says, Ad she'yizrek alav es adam, one may back out from a Korban Pesach even after it's shechted until the kohen is zerek the dam in the mizbeach b'shviloi on his behalf. According to Reb Shimon, the pasuk teaches that one may back out of the Korban Pesach as long as the avodah is still being performed. So one may back out until the dam is on the mizbeach, since that's the last step of the avodah. However, Reb Shimon agrees that one must register before the korban is shechted. Mishnah Daled. Normally, when a group of people register on the Korban Pesach, there's an understanding that they'll all eat the korban together as one chabura. So if one part of the chabura decides that they want to eat alone, they may not force the others to leave and eat somewhere else in a different group. However, in the following case, some of the group can be forced to eat elsewhere. What's the case? If a person who's a member of a group registered on a Korban Pesach registers other people with him to share in his portion, without asking reshus of the other members, since he didn't receive permission to add more people to the chabura, they cannot be considered full members of the chabura. Rather, they have the right only to share of his chelik. For example, if the original group consisted of 10 people, the guests get a share of his tenth of his chelik that he's going to get from the korban. Rashan b'nei chabura liten lo yashaloi. The other members of the chabura may insist on the following arrangement: they give him his portion. He eats from his portion together with his guests in one place, and they eat from their portion in a different place. On one Korban Pesach may be eaten by two groups eating in two separate places. The original members of the Chabura have the right to say that they don't want to eat the Korban Pesach together with the strangers who are not part of the original group. Mishnah Hey. Zov Sharosh De Riyos Shechten Olav Bashvi. A person who's Tameh and Erev Pesach who will continue to be Tameh that night cannot be part of the Korban Pesach, since he will not be able to eat from it that night. The Mishnah teaches, however, that a person who is Tameh and Erev Pesach can join in the Korban Pesach if his Tumah will be gone at night. The only exception is someone who became Tameh from Tumas Meis. Even if Shvi Shaloi, even if the 7th day of his Tara process falls on Erev Pesach, and he'll definitely be Tahar at night, he may not join the Chabur for Korban Pesach, because this is learned out of a pasuk. Kidichsiv, like the pasuk says, "Vehi anashu b'shahu tmeim lanefesh adam leyochlu la'asas haPesach b'yom hahu lehayu yechaylum." That day, they were not able to bring the Korban Pesach. Hala erev hayu yechaylum la'achva Pesach. That evening, it would seem like they would be able to eat from the Korban Pesach. V'nidchu lePesach sheni. Af al pi kein, we see that they were nidcha to Pesach sheni. Aval shar tumas, but other tumas aside from becoming tamei l'meis, ichazi l'meichel l'urta sheichtem alav. If they were able to eat from the carbon that night, you shech to them, even though he didn't have Erev Shemesh yet, meaning he has to wait for the sun to go down in order to be part of the carbon. So Zav Sharosh De Rios. A Zav who experienced two emissions. He saw two sightings. A Zav is a man who became Tameh through a series of involuntary bodily emissions. If he experiences these emissions twice on the same day, or on 2 consecutive days, he's Tameh for 7 days, after which he's Tovel in a Mayon, and becomes Tahar at night. If he experiences 3 emissions on the same day, or on 3 consecutive days, he must also bring a set of karbanos on the day after his Tvilo to complete his Tara process. Until these karbanos are brought, he may not eat from any karbanos. So Zav Sharash De Riyos. So a Zav who experienced 2 emissions is Tovel on the 7th day of his Tumah, and becomes Tahar at nightfall. A Tameh person who's Tovel himself to become Tahar doesn't become fully Tahar until nightfall after his Tefillah. Until then, he remains Tameh in regard to Truma and Kachim, as we learned in Brachas Daf Beis. So Shechten Allah Bashvi, therefore we may shecht the Korban Pesach on his behalf on the 7th day of his Tumah if it falls on Erev Pesach, since he'll be able to eat from it that night. He must, however, be Tovel himself before shechting the Korban Pesach, so that his Tumah is gone by the time night falls. Rosh Shalosh, however, if he experienced 3 Riyas on the same day, or on 3 consecutive days, so that in addition to being Tovel on the 7th day, he must also bring the Karbonos of the Taras Hazav. So, and he needs to bring these Karbonos, because it's part of his Tara process, he needs to bring these Karbonos before he shechts the Korban Pesach. So, Shechten Alav B'Shmini Shalai. You may shech the Korban Pesach on his behalf on Erev Pesach if it's on the 8th day from when he became Tameh. However, he must at least deposit the money for his Karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. They had a certain locker, so to speak, for the purpose of these Karbanos, so that we may be sure that his Karbanos will be brought that day and his Tumah will be fully gone that night. And the Kohanim made sure to empty the chest each day and be makar of all the Karbanos from which money had been deposited there, as we'll see in Masechta Shkolim, Perek Vav. Okay, now, taking it to a Shemeres Yom Kineged Yom, which is a woman who observes a day corresponding to a day. She experienced abnormal blood flow for 1 day. She becomes tar by being Tovel herself the next day and waiting until night. So Shechten Aleha. So what's this all about? When a woman's menstrual flow begins, it's normal for it to continue anywhere from 1 to 7 days. A flow that occurs during the following 11 days, from day 8 to day 18 from the beginning of her period, is considered abnormal. If, after being matar herself from the original dam, she experiences a single flow within those 11 days, she is tameh until the following day. She then is tovel herself and remains tameh until nightfall. If she experiences another flow on that second day, she remains tameh until the 3rd day, when she immerses herself, and she remains tameh until nightfall. If she experiences yet another flow on the 3rd day, she becomes a zava and remains tameh until 7 consecutive days pass with no flow at all. She may then immerse herself on the 7th clean day, but remains somewhat tameh until she brings her karbonos of zava on the 8th day. This is a din d'oraisa. Midrabanon, which was a takana after the times of the Mishnayos, a woman must always wait for Shuva Nekiyim 7 clean days without any dam at all before being tovel herself in a mikveh to become tahar. So Shemeres Yom Kineged Yom, meaning that she's in this state after the 11 days, Shebein Nida L'Nido, Sheich L'Nila B'Sheni Shalo, therefore we may shecht a Korban Pesach on her behalf on the 2nd day, which is the day following that flow that she saw, provided that she's tovel herself before the Shechita, so that she'll certainly be tahar at nightfall. Ra'asa Shnei Yomim, if she experienced abnormal flows on 2 consecutive days, in which case she is matar herself by being tovel on the 3rd day and waiting until nightfall, Sheich L'Nila B'Shlishi, we may shecht a Korban Pesach on her behalf on the 3rd day, again, provided that she is tahar. V'hazava, for a zava who must observe 7 clean days and then bring karbonos on the 8th day, and who is also to eat any karbonos until then, Shechten Aleho Bashmini, you may shecht the Korban Pesach on her behalf only in Erev Pesach that falls on the 8th day of her Tumah. Here too she must deposit her money in the Beis HaMikdash for her karbonos before we may shecht a Korban Pesach on her behalf.